Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a Monday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Monday. It is the 7th day of December in the year 2015. It is, of course, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. I was hearing a note this morning that a comment from one of the 10 survivors of Pearl Harbor that are still resident here in West Virginia that are still with us, and I wanted to make that point. I also want to make the point that today is my brother's 47th anniversary. He and Linda have been together for 47 years, and if he happens to be listening, I want to extend best wishes to him as well. I did put a little thing reply to him to their announcement of their anniversary on Facebook this morning by making the point that I was there, and I agree with them. It doesn't seem like 47 years ago, but anyway, congratulations to them. And welcome to another week of programming here at the Virtual Center. It is a pleasure to be with you. We would love to hear from you. There's been quite a bit of going on over the last 3 or 4 days since we've last been together last Wednesday. And so I want to spend a little bit of time today bringing you up to date on a couple of things that have happened since we were last together, and then I want to make a comment or two about those things, and then I'd like to return to the issue of the administrative state that we were dealing with earlier. Of course, there's been so much. You'll recall that Bob Kincaid let us know about 15 minutes before the end of the program on Wednesday that there had been a mass shooting in California. And, of course, we know that our attention since then has been pretty much locked into the situation in California and efforts to try to divine a motive and to discover a motive, and in some cases divine one, I think. And then, of course, I'm sure that many of you joined me last evening in listening to the president's address, and of course, the president's position is not only about the attack on ISIS, but also the efforts of groups like ISIS to plant fear and to divide us amongst from one group amongst the other. In a multi cultural society like ours, a diverse society like ours, of course, divisiveness is probably the easiest thing to create and the most difficult thing to address. So I think the president kind of hit the nail on the head for all of us, and I don't anticipate at this point that we'll have heard of the last of that. But I think Bob made the comment on Wednesday, and I just repeat it again because I think it's so on target that if it's like the previous ones, the next thing we will hear about it is the next one. And that, of course, seems to be the problem. And I think the president has taken that on as well. And I, like you, I heard a number of the candidates for the office of president since that time making comments about some of the legislation. As you know, about 3 of the Republican candidates actually more than I think 3 of the candidates who were in the United States Senate voted, turned around and voted against some of the gun legislation that was being proposed in Congress, and I heard a number of them, Marco Rubio and Cruz and the rest of them, trying to explain and rationalize their vote against gun laws and whether, in fact, none of the legislation proposed would have done anything to dissuade or to interrupt this particular event, and on and on and on. And we've gone through that. And of course, what we're dealing with is a situation where those who continue to vote to ensure that nothing happens find themselves defending nothing. And what I mean is they're defending inaction. And they're going in numbers of different directions to accomplish that. And of course, the fact of the matter is they refuse to address the real issue here, which is who is behind and who is pulling the strings on society's decision to do nothing. And I think if there's one thing that came through in the president's address last night, it was the degree of frustration that he's reached as he begins what clearly is his final year in office. And to have so much of his administration for the past 7 years marked by one mass shooting after the other is, I'm sure, is disconcerting and frustrating to him as it is to all of us. And again, I don't mean to, and in fact, not only don't I mean to, I will not in any way discourage or dissuade or throw cold water on or put a damper on people who attend and want to organize and attend the memorial services for these folks. But I suggest to you that I have seen so many memorial services, so many burning candles, and so many bouquets of flowers in places, not only in this country, but around the world. I'm thinking of Paris here. And the fact of the matter is, all of it is not affecting, it seems to me, the real issue, which is the reluctance or the unwillingness of the people who might be able to do something about this to move. That's just my own opinion for what it's worth, and I do recognize that because I'm here with the microphone, so to speak. I guess that gives me an opinion to kind of or the right to assert an opinion that many out there who may disagree with me don't have a microphone to expound on, and I understand that. But so I hope you'll take it with a grain of salt, because I don't mean in any way to impinge or to dismiss the motives and the sincerity and the concerns of people, because I think all of us are frustrated. None of us know what to do. All of us want to try to do the right thing, and all of us get extremely frustrated when it seems like the kinds of things that might actually have an impact don't seem to ever happen. Again, back to the issue at hand, which is the Virtual Center. I want to thank you for your continued support of the Virtual Center and for your support of the Head On Radio Network. I know that Bob has been back in the saddle for a week now since his filling in 2 weeks ago for Mike Malloy through the Thanksgiving week, and I know that many of you are back into normal drive rather than overdrive, as I'm sure you were last week. If you are a regular supporter of the Head On Network, I want to thank you very, very much for your continued support, and I want to encourage you during this end of the year holiday season to do all that you can to make sure that the Head On Radio Network and its programs continue to reach all of us. I think they're assuredly, they are more necessary than ever. I do encourage you to participate actively in our program. I'm going to give you the phone number, and there has been an issue with the phone, and I forgot to ask Bob whether in fact the phone was active today. But it seems to me if you try it and it's not active, then you'll know that. The phone number for calling in and giving us the opportunity to hear your opinions or ideas, comments, and suggestions is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to communicate with me via email, one-on-one, I would love to hear from you. I'll do the very best I can to respond to you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com, all lowercase. waobrien, OBRIEN, 906@gmail.com. And finally, I do call your attention, and I know many of you are aware of it, of our Facebook page. If you go to Facebook and you type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will gain access to our Facebook page. I do encourage you to do it because, very honestly, there's quite a bit on it. And I've put 3 or 4 things on it since we were together last Wednesday. And I've tried to taken to putting more and more commentary on it. And again, I was looking through it last evening and just thumbing through the last couple of weeks on the Facebook page. There's quite a bit on it. There's 5 or 6 interpretive pieces and opinion pieces on it. And your opinions and your comments and your ideas and reactions are indeed solicited, and I want to thank you for it. I mentioned that a number of things had occurred since we last were together, and of course, the mass shooting in California is the big one, and the president's address last night, and a number of other things. And I recognize those, and I don't mean to imply that anything that might happen closer to home carries the same weight that those do. But in my own little world, which kind of revolves to more than I've ever expected that it would, around the virtual center, I might say that a couple of things have happened over the last several days. One is that I was very delighted to see that a piece that I have written and submitted on the Common Core was published yesterday in the Charleston Gazette. I've received a number of comments on it. Most of them positive, a couple of them not positive, but that's really what opinion pieces are about. This is an opinion page, and I want to thank the folks at the Charleston Gazette for their willingness to support this particular piece enough to run it in their Sunday edition, and I want to thank them also. They actually supported or added to the piece, whatever quality there might be in the piece, with a little bit of artwork associated with it, and I appreciated that very much. It draws attention to the article and in the newspaper, and it was online as well, and I really appreciate that. I might also say that one of the other things that occurred, which comes very, very close to home here at the Virtual Center, it's something that all of us who have listened to the Virtual Center for any length of time are familiar with, and that's the idea of Article 5 of the Constitution and the growing potential, at least in my mind, to the calling of a second constitutional convention, a constitutional convention, if you will, under Article 5. What would make this particular convention different from others is that this would be the first time that this particular provision of Article 5 of the Constitution has been utilized to consider the issues of amending the Constitution of the United States. We have spent, and those of you who have been regular listeners here at the Virtual Center know that over the last year or year and a half, I can remember we spent at least a week of programming, a full 3 days of programming, dealing with Mark Levin's book, which was published, I believe, in 2013, entitled The Liberty Amendments, where he laid out 11 specific suggestions for amendments to the Constitution of the United States. We looked at all of them. We looked at the rather under-the-radar, surreptitious efforts of organized groups backed by big money, corporate money, the Koch brothers' money, various other groups like the American Legislative Exchange Council and their in-house constitutional historian, Robert Nadelson. We spent quite a bit of time looking at him, looking at some of his analysis of the Constitution. All of this with the idea that with the Republican Party takeover of so many state legislatures and so many governorships, we were getting incredibly close to the magic number of 2/3 of the states necessary to call a constitutional convention to amend the Constitution of the United States. And as we know, and we talked about extensively here at the Virtual Center, the issue of the balanced budget amendment, which so many people support, seems to be the issue around which the push for a second convention is taking shape, is happening. That we pointed out that there's so much support for the idea of a balanced budget amendment at the federal level, since so many state legislatures have it. And so, and since most of us in our own checking accounts operate on a balanced budget situation, we can't write more checks than we have money in our account or we go to jail. And so there has been a push for this kind of a change or this kind of imposition on the federal government as well, in order to bring the increasing debt that the nation continues to operate under to a halt, and then to adopt strategies designed to reverse it and begin to reduce the size of that debt until seemingly it would be gone. But the fact of the matter is, we've collected over in previous months so much evidence to indicate that this idea of the balanced budget amendment really is just the nose under the tent, so to speak, for an agenda that is much more ambitious and I believe much more dangerous than this. And that is a wholesale shredding of the Constitution of the United States as we know it. Once you get a convention in session, then you can look around, you can look through the 18th century, you can look at the papers of the founders, and what you find is almost nothing about the agenda of such a convention called by 2/3 of the states. The fact of the matter is, every amendment to the Constitution so far, and there have been 27 of them total, and of course the first 10 we know, the Bill of Rights, were all passed in one fell swoop, as it were, in 1791. The only strategy, or the only way that the Constitution has been amended so far under Article 5 is for a particular amendment to pass 2/3 of both houses of Congress and then sent out to the states for ratification. And under the provisions of Article 5, when 2/3 of both houses of Congress approve an amendment to the Constitution, it then is submitted to the states for ratification. And when 3/4 of state legislatures, 3/4 of the states, approve that particular amendment, it's added to the Constitution of the United States. That's the only amendment procedure that's ever been used so far. But as we know, there is another. And the other one is for a constitutional convention to convene when requested by 3/4 of the state legislatures. Excuse me, 2/3 of the state legislatures. That particular method of amendment has never been used before, but that's the one that is in the offing now. Because Republicans are in control of enough state legislatures to get very, very close to the magic number of 34 states. And when 34 state legislatures request a convention, Article 5 says, not that Congress shall consider calling a convention, it says that Congress will convene a convention. In other words, there's no option left. Not only is there no option for Congress other than to support or to respond to the request of 2/3 of the state legislatures for such a convention, but there's nothing anywhere to indicate procedural direction or operational behavior once the convention is called. There's nothing anywhere to indicate an agenda, whether in fact the calling of such a convention can only be for one specific purpose. If the so-called convention is called in order to consider a balanced budget amendment, does that mean that only the balanced budget amendment can be considered? There's no answer to that question. We don't know. And it's very clear that since we don't know, that makes the possibility of a runaway convention a real possibility. And that seems to be the agenda of those pushing this particular convention issue the hardest. They are going out of their way, those who support it. ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and many of the key members of it, key corporate members of it, the big money behind it, are going out of their way to reassure those who are concerned about the dangers of a runaway convention that indeed the delegates, once they get in the room, could pass a resolution agreeing to stick only to the issue of the balanced budget amendment. And we must also recognize that while most of the initiative that is driven by the balanced budget amendment comes from the political right, comes from the conservative side of the spectrum, the fact of the matter is, given the obvious impact of big money on our election system, on our campaign system, the fact that every one of the major candidates for president, with the exception of Bernie Sanders, has a PAC, a political action committee, well funded, and different candidates have different sugar daddies who are pumping big money into their particular campaigns. Given that fact that these people are going out of their way to assure us that the convention will not be runaway, but the fact of the matter is there's every indication in the world that that's exactly what they want to happen. There's only been one constitutional convention held, as we know, and that is the initial one, the original one that approved that approved the Constitution of the United States for ratification. What we need to recognize is that that convention was a runaway convention. It was not called to scrap the Articles of Confederation and design an entirely new structure of government. Revising the Articles of Confederation was the ostensible justification for the calling of the Constitutional Convention, but we know that Madison and some of the others were very, very active behind the scenes because they were planning, once such a convention to revise the Articles did indeed happen, they planned to hijack the convention, scrap the Articles, and replace it with something else. And of course, as we know, Madison already had his Virginia plan ready to go. That seems to be exactly what's happening now. Why am I bringing this up today? I bring this up today because on Friday, I believe the 3rd of December, Common Cause issued an extensive report on this particular issue, warning the nation of the dangers and the money behind and the under-the-radar behavior of those who are pushing for the calling of a convention. And as I think I got a little bit off track there earlier, so let me go back for a moment. We also, because of the money that is in our political system now, and once we started to talk about political action committees, I lost the train of thought there. The fact of the matter is a number of liberal groups are pushing for a constitutional convention to overturn Citizens United and get some sort of controls back over campaign finance reform. So what we have is in some ways the beginnings, the emergence of what many people refer to as a perfect storm, because we've got both liberals and conservatives pushing for a second convention to address totally different issues. But the fact of the matter is one's as dangerous as the other. Because once the convention is called, whatever the justification is for the call, there is every indication in the world that it will become a runaway convention. There's every indication in the world that those people pushing hardest for the balanced budget amendment call for a convention want exactly that. A runaway convention in order to lay a number of amendments on the table which would effectively shred the Constitution of the United States as we know it. The fact that Common Cause has come out with a report may be the beginning of public awareness of what's going on. Up until now, other than here, most of this activity has been so-called under the radar. Most of it has been in the background. The media has done nothing about it. I did some speaking here locally, and a number of people made the comment that they heard nothing about this. They've seen nothing about it in the newspapers, nothing about it, and the media, nothing on television. The mass media has paid no attention to this particular effort at all when we are getting very, very close to the 2/3 of the states required for the calling of such a convention. And if you combine the 27 states controlled by Republicans and the 27 states that are already on record as requesting a constitutional convention, and then you add liberals who are pushing for a convention to deal with Citizens United, 34 states calling for a convention is not that remote a possibility. It's not just a possibility, it's a probability. I think all of this makes the fall elections even more important than any of us have realized. The thing that I found very encouraging about the Common Core report is that the Common Cause report is that Common Cause is calling attention to the issue on a massive scale. And I am expecting that we're going to begin to see more and more attention paid to this issue. I just hope it's not too little too late. This weekend, one of the items that I put on Facebook was a reaction to the Common Cause report. And one of the things I think it's important to note is that Common Cause is very, very supportive of a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. And so therefore, Common Cause acknowledges in this report that the organization is very much inclined to support the calling of a convention to consider such an amendment. But they now realize with this report that they have released that the threat of a runaway convention is so great that Common Cause has concluded that the risk is too grave. So they basically have taken a position against the second convention, even though they would like to have one to address the issue of Citizens United. I think that speaks to it. I think other things that are contained in the report of Common Cause are well worth our attention. One is the title of the report itself. The title of the report is The Dangerous Path, Big Money's Plan to Shred the Constitution. That, I have argued, pretty much sums up the logic of what's going on. Also, we need to recognize that there are some prominent conservative voices who are raising a red flag about a second convention. And what I'm talking about here are those conservatives who also recognize the dangers of a runaway convention and are so committed to the issue of constitutionalism and the preservation of our Constitution that they too are afraid of a constitutional convention. One of them is Justice Antonin Scalia. Justice Scalia said in response to the call for the threat of a constitutional convention, Justice Scalia said, "Whoa, who knows what would come out of it?" Unquote. In an address this past spring to the Federalist Society, which is a conservative group in Washington, Justice Scalia called the convention, the second convention idea, a horrible idea. This is not a good century to be writing a constitution, Scalia said. There are other prominent conservative groups. Phyllis Schlafly's group among them, that have raised red flags about the dangers of a second convention. Earlier this year, the president of the Arizona State Senate, who's a Republican, his name is Andy Biggs, published a book on this idea of a constitutional convention, and he entitled his book, quote, "The Con of the Con-Con." In other words, the con job associated with the idea of a constitutional convention, the con of the con-con. In that book, Biggs warned of the fraudulent efforts, that's the con, of big money backers to hijack such a constitution once it is convened. Despite, Biggs says, reassurances that the delegates can control the agenda and keep the group or the convention on track, Biggs reminds his readers that the founders never mentioned agendas, never mentioned issues about what would happen should such a convention be called. All we know is the founders did not want a constitutional convention called at all. And it seems to me the most significant voice against the calling of a second convention is the voice of James Madison himself, who wrote the Virginia Plan, who, in essence, fathered the Constitution of the United States. We know that Madison and other Federalists never intended, and this is what we have addressed here on the Virtual Center. This is not in the Common Cause report. I think if Common Cause knew it, they would have included it. The fact that the reason that Madison and the others did not address the issue of agenda in the calling of a state called convention to amend the Constitution under Article 5 is because the Federalists pushing hardest for ratification of the Constitution never intended this particular provision in Article 5 to ever be enacted. We know, because we've looked at the sources, we've looked at the letters and the writings of the founders. We know that the only reason that Madison and Hamilton went out of their way to reassure those who were reluctant to support the Constitution for fear that it would put too much power in the hands of the federal government, that they included things within the Constitution like this particular provision for Article 5 in order to reassure reluctant citizens so that they would support ratification of the Constitution. But they never intended that it would ever be used. Hamilton wrote extensively about the fact that the amendment process to the Constitution needed to work from the top down. Congress would approve and send appropriate amendments out to the states for ratification. That's the way the Constitution was intended to be amended, if indeed it was. And this particular provision was never intended, never expected. That, in fact, the founders did not believe that there was a chance in the world that 2/3 of the states would agree on anything. But remember, that's the late 18th century, and the situation has changed. Our two-party system has changed it. The power of the Republican takeover of state legislatures has helped change it. The impact of big money brought on and ratified by the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United has made it possible for big money to so influence our elections at the state level that they have literally, groups like ALEC have literally been able to take control of our state legislatures one at a time and to come at the Constitution from the bottom, from the state level, rather than go at it by trying to take over the government on the national level. There are more Democrats than there are Republicans. The fact that more and more Democrats don't vote is an issue that I think all of us are going to have to deal with and address. But the fact of the matter is, big money has taken control of our state elections. Because once Republicans legislatures have got into power and have put Republicans in the state houses as governors through a process of gerrymandering legislative districts, safe districts have been created. Most of the opposition voters have been lumped into strangely configured districts where the opposition is put into the same districts together, so they will end up with fewer representatives. On the other hand, in very rural states, western states, southern states, southwestern states, the districts have been so drawn that very, very few Republicans have been able to get elected in those districts. They've been given the money necessary to run successful campaigns, primarily against the power of an overbearing national government. They have gotten elected into districts that are safe, and in the process they have entered into a Faustian bargain with their big money backers. So long as they vote according to the agenda, as long as they don't veer from the agenda designed for them, then they can count on financial support necessary to keep them in office. But the other side of this bargain is that if they don't vote the party line, so to speak, if they dare to go off on their own and to oppose measures supported by those calling the shots, then these big money backers will uncover another novice legislator and use that money to make sure that these people don't get reelected. In other words, their political career is directly tied to their willingness to go along. The result is that through the process of big money in our campaigns, through the process of gerrymandering, we have reached the process or the situation where this effort is coming painfully close to being able to get the 2/3 votes states necessary to call a constitutional convention. And one of the things I put in my write-up of this particular thing is to look at some of the issues that are associated with a runaway convention, besides the balanced budget amendment. Other changes to the Constitution that lobbying groups like ALEC seek to secure. These are some of the changes that a convention once called would be placing on the table for consideration. Term limits for members of Congress. Term limits for the Supreme Court justices. And we know that Alexander Hamilton wrote extensively and passionately about the importance of term limits for judges in order that the court could fulfill its judicial responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States. These particular groups would impose term limits for members of the Supreme Court. In addition, state legislatures would select U.S. senators. No longer would the voters be allowed to elect their 2 state senators in statewide elections. State legislatures would be given the right to overturn congressional legislation as well as Supreme Court decisions. Besides placing limits on spending as part of the balanced budget amendment, these folks would also consider an amendment to place limits on federal taxation. Mark Levin, in his Liberty Amendments, talks about limiting taxes to a very small percentage of anticipated expenditures. In other words, Congress would not be allowed to secure the kind of revenue needed to take on issues of governance other than what they were permitted to do by state legislatures. This is, of course, the very same system employed in the Articles of Confederation to control Congress by denying Congress the power to tax. The amendments being proposed here would also place limitations on Congress's power to tax. Also, through the passage of voter ID laws and other kinds of restrictions on voting, we would see a shift from voting as a right to voting as a privilege. In other words, every effort in the world would be undertaken to limit the turnout at the polls in such a way that the power of those in power would never be challenged, ever again. The sum total of these amendments approved at a convention would effectively shred the Constitution of the United States as the founders developed it and ratified it. And that's the report that Common Cause released on Friday, entitled The Dangerous Path, Big Money's Plan to Shred the Constitution. The last thing that I would add on this is a visit back to James Madison, who warned us about the dangers of a convention, of a second convention. In fact, we know that Madison changed his position from opposition to a Bill of Rights to support for a Bill of Rights because opponents of the Constitution were proposing a second convention to consider amendments. Madison's position, and when he saw that, was, we better commit to giving them the amendments they want so that they don't end up in a convention, because once we convene a convention, the Constitution as we know it is dead, Madison said. In Federalist number 49, Madison wrote the following, quote, "The passions, not the reason, of the public would sit in judgment in such a gathering." And he reminded readers of Federalist number 49 that, quote, "It is reason alone, the reason alone of the public that ought to control and regulate government. The passions of the public ought to be controlled and regulated by government." The anti-government rhetoric and the passion that is being generated in order to build a movement for the calling of a second convention guarantees that Madison's warning in Federalist number 49 would be rendered inoperative. Because the passions of the population would be whipped up for a second convention in such a way, the rhetoric in opposition to federal power and the federal government's ability to govern would be ginned up to such a degree that the people in control of the convention would be effectively given license to do whatever the hell they wanted with and to the Constitution of the United States. It seems to me that we need to do all we can to draw public attention to the Common Cause report, to encourage people to read it, to call in to traditional talk shows and talk about it, to do everything we can do to make the Common Cause report visible enough that the vast majority of people become aware of what the threat is. The one weapon that the people pushing this second convention can't deal with is an informed public. They've done everything that they can do to control what the public knows and what the public doesn't know, how the public is educated and how the public is not educated. The one thing that they can't control is an educated public once they know. It seems to me that is our opportunity. Namely, to do everything we can so that more and more people know. I recognize, and it worries me, that issues like ISIS and issues like the mass shootings in California, in Paris, and other places are so drawing the focus and attention of the general public that the public's attention is being drawn there and away from some of these other issues. The fact of the matter is, while the American people debate and discuss their fears of terrorism, business as usual continues to happen in this country in those areas where those engaged in that business don't want the public to be looking. Big business continues to do business. The Dow Jones Industrial Average continues to hover at 18,000. Corporate giants like Pfizer continue to manipulate the tax laws in such a way that they can link up with an Irish-based company and pretend that their home offices are in Ireland so they can dodge taxes within the United States. Things that the public needs to be aware of, needs to know. Issues that must have the light of day shone upon them. All of these things are being allowed to operate in the shadows, under the radar. The more attention and the more focus, mass shootings, and the terrorism spurred by groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda continue to raise. That was the president's point last night. We can't give into that. That's exactly what ISIS wants. Let me point out that's exactly what the people we're talking about here who would shred our Constitution want. They want the public's attention diverted elsewhere. And they don't care what that elsewhere is. Whether it's a debate on guns, whether it's terrorism, whether it's mass shootings, whether it's the war against ISIS in the field, whether it's control of the military, whatever it is, it's drawing public attention away from them so they can continue to do their own business. And their business is not our business. It's intended to give us the business. Consequently, as far as the second convention is concerned, we've got to do everything that we can do to inform and make as many people as possible aware of the Common Cause report. We've got to make it difficult for these people to continue to fly under the radar. We've got to expose ALEC. We've got to expose members of our state legislatures who are connected and who are doing the bidding of ALECs. We've got to keep aware, make sure we're aware of what model legislation ALEC is proposing in our state legislatures. Common Core is one. The defeat of Common Core is one. There's no question that the calling of a constitutional convention under Article 5 of the Constitution is another. We have got to make people aware of the fact that it's there, who's supporting it, who's bankrolling it, who's pushing it, what their agenda is, all of it. Common Core has revealed a lot of it. We've got to do everything we can to publicize, it seems to me. Not just the fact that there is a report. It seems to me what we've got to do is pull out the essence of that report and make people aware of it. The fact that it's not just liberals, but it's people like Justice Scalia and others. In Virginia, for example, members of the legislature, the head of the minority, the Democratic Party in the Virginia Senate, for example, made the comment about this second convention. It's in the Common Cause report. And his reaction is every nut in the country will be at such a convention. Every nut job that we know about will be at the table. They'll all be there. We can't risk this. As Benjamin Franklin told us on the last day of the convention, September 17th, 1787, all of us have things we'd like to change in the Constitution. But all of us don't belong at the table to revise the Constitution. And I think we need to recognize that. I think we need to take the wisdom of the founders seriously in this particular case. This just might be the greatest threat to our system of government as we know it that we've had at least since the Civil War. I say that knowing that I noticed yesterday that there are people, those in Texas, pushing hard for Texas to secede from the Union. And as bizarre as that strikes many of us, I would suggest it doesn't pose the seriousness that this particular threat does, at least in my mind. I think that we're at 57 minutes after the hour. We're very close to the top of the hour. I think this is probably a good place for us to pause and take our break, and then we'd have pretty much a full hour, second hour, for the balance of our program today. I think this particular issue, we've done so much in previous months with the idea of a second convention and the kind of amendments that they are proposing, that I really think to devote any more of our program time at this point would probably be counterproductive. So I think this is a good place to pause, take our break, and then we come back and we'll shift gears and take on yet another issue. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is 58 minutes after the hour. We will pause and take a 5-minute break, and very near the top of our second hour, we'll be back and we'll have a full hour of programming here on this Monday edition of the Virtual Center. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
We now return to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Here again is Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid. Thank you so much for the music. It was quite a pleasant change and so much in the spirit of the season, and I want to thank you for it. It's
My pleasure.
Absolutely wonderful. I loved it. I've got to say, as an aside, that my wife and her granddaughter and I had the privilege, and I say that advisedly, it was absolutely a privilege to attend the local performance here in southern West Virginia Friday night of the Nutcracker. And the crowd was incredible. It was the auditorium, which seats 1,500, was probably 80% full. And I'm guessing that Saturday night's attendance would probably be about the same. And the third performance was on yesterday afternoon, was Sunday afternoon. And there actually was a fourth performance for school children in the area that occurred in the afternoon on Friday. And it was sold out. I mean, it was full house. And it was incredible. I've seen the Nutcracker done a number of times, and I don't know whether I've changed or whether this particular performance was that special. But I left Friday night absolutely in ecstasy. The music, the quality of the music, just absolutely incredible. And I guess I was drawn back to Friday night when I listened to the music that Bob chose for our 5-minute interlude here on this Monday program, and I thank him so much for that. You are listening to the Virtual Center. We are here for our second hour. If you are just joining us, we welcome you to a new week of broadcasting here at the Virtual Center. I will tell you that during our first hour, we revisited the issue of the threat of an Article 5 constitutional convention and a report released on Friday by Common Cause warning the nation of the dangers of such a convention. And we spent the better part of our first hour looking at some of the threats and some of the dangers of that. We included a quote from James Madison, Federalist number 49, in which he talked about the issue of passion versus reason. And he pointed out that it is important to keep in mind that while government in a republic must be responsible to the reason of its citizens, when it comes to the passions of its citizens, those passions must be controlled by government rather than in control of government. And I think what we're dealing with here is a situation which is making every effort in the world of the big money backers of this particular movement to build the kind of momentum necessary to literally shred the Constitution of the United States. That was our first hour. So if you're just joining us today, welcome, and we will be looking at other issues here in our second hour. For those of you who are still with us after the first hour, I want to thank you for your faith in us and your continued support of the Virtual Center and of the Head On Radio Network. I remind you again that we would love to hear from you. On our program last Wednesday, you'll recall that our friend Horst from Taiwan was kind enough to join us in the second hour. We had kind of a technical breakdown in the communication, but he was with us long enough that I think we got the gist and the benefit of his call. We invite you to call as well and share your thoughts and your ideas, your perceptions, your concerns, whatever it might be on the issues that we're raising here at the Virtual Center. We would love to hear from you. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to share your thoughts with me in an email, my email address is waobrien906@gmail.com.
Dr. Bill?
Yes, Bob?
It is as if you have conjured him. Horst is on the line for you.
Well, isn't that great? Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. Horst.
I got conjured. I missed that part.
Welcome to a new week.
Yeah, hey.
It is a pleasure. I was just saying that you were with us on Wednesday, and we had a little bit of a problem with the technology, but you were with us for long enough to make the point of your call. So it's great to hear you again.
Oh, well, that's extra ironic because I was just trying to connect to you, and due to technological problems, I missed that part. So, or that introduction.
Bob,
but anyway,
Bob said it's almost as if I was speaking directly to you because as I was talking, you appeared on the thing. So that's just great.
No, yeah, that's.
So how are you?
Well, I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
Things are looking up. I think I'm all right with it all.
Good.
So,
all right.
Yeah, as far as last week goes, just for a brief word of explanation, I was just talking to you, and my something on my computer, I don't know what happened, but like I lost all my sound. I couldn't hear a thing, and it took me several minutes to get that straightened out. And by that time, Bob had come in with the news of the shooting in San Bernardino, wow, what do you do about that? So
well, I know you don't. You can't. No, you can't. You can't respond to that. I agree with you.
No, yeah. So
Yeah.
the situation had changed significantly by that point. So
No, exactly. Yeah.
No, yeah, but anyway, we're on to a new subject this week, and again, there's so much to talk about, and normally I would habitually I usually wait until later in the week to chime in, but I just happen to be by the phone today, so I just had to say a couple of things.
That is great. Go right ahead.
Well, we mentioned. What? Oh God! I'm sorry. Every time I try to start a conversation here, it's so big. So let's see.
That's
One
great.
of the last things I heard you talk about was when we're attempting to launch ourselves into the process of amending the Constitution, we have to be very careful about who's qualified to initiate and not just initiate, but to actually adjudicate such a situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, if the states call a constitutional convention and everything goes on the table, we have to ask ourselves, we have to sit and think long and hard, who's going to run this process? Mm-hmm. And who are these people? And what business do they have doing any of this? And not only that, but on whose authority are they doing this in the first place?
Mm-hmm. And
it's one of the supreme ironies that I've been thinking. You've talked. We discussed many, going back to practically the beginning of this program, or this incarnation of it anyway, for the last couple of years. This tremendous problems with campaign finance problems.
Right.
And there is a legitimate urgent need, critical even, to reform this situation. And it looks as though, thanks to the Supreme Court, that the only way around that is some kind of constitutional amendment. So how do you do that when we have this situation where our legislative bodies are not going to do that for us, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we're left to these desperate measures. So yeah, there's a real need for action at that level. But the problem is the right people are not prepared for that fight. And in the meantime, on the other side, there's just like an entire movement. There's a massive coordinated effort that's been building for years, mm-hmm. that's ready to jump in and take the reins as soon as that situation gets unleashed.
Right.
And that's the essential problem we're looking at. On the one hand, we have never needed serious reform worse in our history as a nation, but at the same time, we have rarely, I don't know about never, but like this is exactly the wrong time for that,
right,
for that process to come up.
That's what Justice Scalia said. He said this is not the century to be writing a constitution.
Well, true enough.
So
I'm not sure exactly what context he uttered that in. I imagine I could still find grounds to disagree with him on that. But
well, I think
goes,
well,
yeah.
I mean, his point was that the entire quote was that he's obviously referring to the dangers of a runaway convention, yeah. And he said, we won't. There's no way we'll know what might come out of that. And he said, a convention right now is a horrible idea. This is not the century. This is not a century. We ought to be writing. We ought to be rewriting the Constitution. And I think what he's suggesting, and you're right. I chose to interpret that as being that he is a jurist, and in many ways philosophically. He and I disagree on most everything, but on the other hand, his commitment to the Constitution and to the value of constitutionalism as a way to do business seems to be dictating his particular position on this. And I agree with him on that.
Yeah, I do too. As far as that goes, I would ask one other thing though. It's like when he was quoted saying that, how recently was that?
That was in the spring.
Oh, it's spring this year. Okay, because Scalia also is fairly renowned for contradicting statements that he made that sounded sensible several years before.
Right.
And like suddenly reversing himself. In fact, he's quite famous for doing that in recent years, like to the point that several onlookers, professionally trained, jurists have been thinking he might be losing his marbles because some of the discrepancies are so. I don't say that tongue in cheek. I mean seriously.
I know. Yeah. But this was an address he gave to the Federalist Society, and it's mentioned in the Common Cause report.
Okay.
And that's why I mention it. But I mean, because that's where I got it. Is that in an address to the Federalist Society this past spring, he made the comment that a constitutional convention right now is a horrible idea.
Right. Okay.
And so that's the spin that the Common Cause report put on it, and I didn't see any reason to question that. But you're right. I agree that there are concerns sometimes about the consistency of Justice Scalia's thinking on these ideas like originalism and stuff. He'll make a big speech on the importance of originalism, and then he'll begin to support judicial activism the next week if it happens to be a particular issue that he agrees with. So, so
yes, I think someone a couple of years ago came up with like kind of a funny joke of like dueling Scalias or something like that, comparing quotes from here and then.
Yeah. So anyway, that I think you're right, and I think the point you make, and I want to make sure that the point you make is because I think it's a very, very valid one. We are in need of reform, but on the other hand, the situation as it currently exists seems to deny us the vehicle to bring that reform about, at least this one. But on the other hand, the founders never believed that this one was viable anyway. So I think what you're suggesting is that the issue of Citizens United could be, under ideal circumstances, addressed the way other amendments to the Constitution have been addressed, namely by moving it through Congress. But you know what kind of a situation we've got in Congress right now.
Right, yeah. I think this is just like one more checkpoint on like a whole list of items that the founders could have never foreseen. Like, number one, it's not going to get to this point, and if it did, it would never get to this, and if it did, it would never get to this. We're like 5 or 6 items down that list, I think now.
Yeah.
We're actually considering like a state called, well, because of the state's call, it's a constitutional convention. It's no longer just amending. It's a completely different process, right?
It's a convention. Yeah, it's a convention. Right. And Robert Nadelson, the attorney that is employed by ALEC, and the attorney Nadelson that is an employee of ALEC that heads up this organization in Colorado Springs, I think, he goes to great lengths to reassure everybody that the delegates can just agree going into a particular agenda. The Goldwater Society, I think it's called, in Arizona has even put out a draft proposal that attendees at such a convention would agree to going in. That the balanced budget amendment would be the issue. The convention would last no more than 48 hours. And if they weren't able to reach consensus on an amendment within that 48-hour period, the authority of the convention would immediately cease. And therefore they wouldn't be able to do any more damage.
How can that be considered a binding? How is that a binding agreement, though? I mean,
it's not. Obviously, it's not, because there's nobody to enforce it.
You're going to pledge to the Goldwater Commission? I mean, like, okay, yeah, right. Yeah. Take that to the bank, won't you?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, there's no way to enforce it, and that's the issue. And they make I think a big point out of the fact that there are no rules governing the agenda. And I believe the reason there are no rules is because I don't believe the founders ever believed that we'd be here. I don't think they ever believed. I mean, looking at the nation's situation at the time the Constitution was drafted and ratified, the late 80s, there was no way in the world that, I mean, Hamilton in Federalist Number 9 predicted a potential war between the states. I mean, that's how unlikely it was that 2/3 of the states could agree on anything. They couldn't agree on the capital, on where to put the capital. They couldn't agree on anything.
Well, so either that, or as you suggested earlier, this was kind of like offered as a means to pacify anybody who was still unsatisfied with the final product, that there was still a backdoor for the states to get out. To get out, yeah. That's right, but they were also not trying to call attention to the fact that this is here. It's just that we don't want to even get into the details of this because we don't want you to think about that. This is if you have second thoughts, you push the don't button and we'll just do it. But just don't worry about that.
One of the things I've noticed, Horst, in over the last several years, in looking at some of these sources, is that those who advocate a certain way of interpreting the kind of the Scalian way of interpreting the Constitution, and the idea of originalism, they use originalism as a convenient prop for positions that they want. In other words, there's plenty in the document and in the sources surrounding the ratification of the document to endorse or to support a particular ideological point of view. And so therefore, they're very, very adept at pulling out those. But if you look at the entire context of the whole process as a whole, you can begin to see that these things are in there for reasons at the time which made political sense. But those times no longer exist, so now we're dealing with the actual language that's there, and we're putting our own contextual spin on what they mean.
The classic example has to be the Second Amendment. I mean, like, taken outside of historical context, there's no way you can understand what that was meant to convey.
I mean, the idea of the right to, I mean, we're hearing this weekend, after this thing, all about this.
As we do every time.
This right to bear arms as a natural right, as a God-given right, and all. I mean, and when Jefferson talked about inalienable rights, I mean, where was this? I mean,
what I often wonder, what would the Bill of Rights have looked like if cars had existed? At the time, like, would you have a natural inalienable right to have a car, or would there have been, because at the time, what do they have? They had horses and carriages. Okay, you can do some damage to that, but you're really doing your homework if you're going to do that. You're trying hard at that point. So, but transportation is a vital need at the same time, and especially like the way America is geographically divided up now. But like, what would it look like? With something as essential as that, which is to my lights is a lot more essential than in modern life than owning a gun is. Owning a gun back in the frontier days, you needed that for all kinds of reasons. That could be how you got your food. But
it's interesting because when you talk about the issue of what the Bill of Rights would look like if people had cars. Had access to cars, and when you begin to project back into this period with these kinds of things, you come up with some very, very interesting issues. For example, I was thinking about the issue of cars when you were talking about it, and the very first Federalist Papers that John Jay writes, the first 5, I think, deal with the threat of dividing the nation into regions. I mean, the assumption, at the time was that regionally the nation was so divided between northern colonies and southern colonies and people living in the West and the merchant emphasis and the farm emphasis and the middle colonies, the New Yorks and the New Jerseys and the Pennsylvanias and the rest of it, that the nation seemed to be so regionally divided that opponents of the Constitution were proposing that the Confederation be broken up into regional confederations, that in essence the Confederation be comprised of 3 major regions.
If I'm not mistaken, does that not conform to something that Montesquieu said also about administering a republic?
Right.
I had this. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've read that, but yeah.
Hamilton uses that because in order to protect a republic, which Montesquieu believed needed to be small in order to be effective, Montesquieu pointed out that you run the risk of small defenseless republics being vulnerable to attack and takeover by larger societies. So in those kinds of situations, he foresees the potential of a confederation of independent republics forming and establishing rules that they would cooperate together for their mutual protection. And he sees nothing wrong with that. Hamilton uses that as a justification for the large republic of all 13 colonies. You know, that in other words, he points out that Montesquieu himself opened up the prospects or the possibilities of regional groups coming together for their own mutual self-interest, which is really what the Articles of Confederation was 13 independent states, all of them seeking their independence and coming together and agreeing to agree in ways that made independence viable for all of them, but no other way would the central organization have any power over the members, so to speak.
I don't mean to distract at this point, but I do want to verify for a second. Was it not a point that Montesquieu made also that a republic can't be viable if it's over a certain size at the same time, though? Or
right. It needed to be. In fact, Hamilton makes the point in one of the I can't remember which one, but in one of the Federalist Papers, Hamilton makes the point that when you read Montesquieu in terms of the optimum size of a republic in order to function according to the theory of republicanism that he's espousing, Hamilton makes the point that none of our current states would even fit that formula because all of them are too big, with the exception of Delaware and Rhode Island and a couple of them. But he points out most of our states would not be able to fit the bill that or fit the outline of the ideal republic that Montesquieu talks about. So his point is that even the Confederation, the Articles of Confederation itself, violates Montesquieu because the closest that they've come to the optimum size republic that you mentioned was the push for a regional area. But he points out even the states themselves are in most cases too large for the republic that Montesquieu talks about to even work. So Hamilton's whole point is, from the very get-go, we violated the theories of Montesquieu. So therefore, we can't put 100% stock in trying to in arguing for him.
He's off the pedestal at this point.
Right. What he's pointing out is that the people who are citing Montesquieu are doing that because their goal is to undermine the Constitution by saying that.
Or maybe they just don't know what they're talking about, or maybe Montesquieu. Yeah.
They were attorneys, and my own background is interesting because I was focusing on one state. I became captivated with Luther Martin of Maryland, an attorney, Baltimore attorney. And his analysis of the Constitution is absolutely superb. It's so good that Madison and others make the point, and they finally decide the only thing we can do is criticize Luther Martin primarily because he was an alcoholic. In other words, we've got to find a way to besmirch this guy's character because we can't allow him to be taken seriously because he's too good. I mean, Luther Martin really had the concept. I mean, he basically nailed, and his he puts together a series of papers. He writes a series of essays and publishes them on particular aspects of the Constitution, and then he combines them all into a publication he calls The Genuine Information. And it's the most telling, devastating analysis of the Constitution that I've ever seen, that I've ever read.
Did he take notes during the convention itself, or?
Yes, I believe he did, but he was only there a short time.
Oh, okay.
He went there, and the minute he saw what was going on, he left.
Oh, he checked out early. All right.
He checked out early. He had notes as long as he was there, but then he checked out. And against the.
Oh, actually, right. It's him and Madison, right? Like Madison took the most extensive notes, and then like Martin was like the second. Yeah. Okay. That's right.
And then in New York, the two colleagues of Alexander Hamilton, Yates and I can't remember the other one. I think that next to Madison, Yates has the most comprehensive set of notes on the convention. The reason Madison's are the best is because he was there for every session.
Right.
I mean, he took notes on every session. And Yates, because he's an opponent of Hamilton, Yates is the one that takes detailed notes on Hamilton's 6-hour presentation on the 18th of June. And
nice.
And Madison barely mentions Hamilton's proposal because he finds it embarrassing. And but Yates is his enemy, so Yates lays out all the details. Yates lays out all the details Hamilton says.
I'm sorry, you just dropped a bomb on me. Madison was embarrassed by Hamilton's presentation. In the last year and a half, I didn't catch that detail before. When
I say embarrassed, what I mean is that those people that agreed with who supported the Constitution found it were rendered very uncomfortable by Hamilton's presentation, because Hamilton's presentation said that
that
the Constitution
really ought to be a monarchy, right?
the Constitution can't work. We really need to go much further.
Right.
And he basically laid out the values of the British system and the need for a monarchy and all that. And
supporters. Well, I heard you talk about that in the past, but I never caught the reaction aspect from.
Yeah, there was total silence.
Well, I gathered that, but my previous impression was because everyone was so stunned by the absolute genius of it all. But
I don't know that it was the genius. I think that some of them
that puts the whole thing in a different light. I mean, like I've heard you tell the story like 2 or 3 times, and I've always
that's the way I've always interpreted it. That the people who were afraid of the Constitution were, their argument is, oh, geez, Hamilton's there. I told you we can't trust this damn thing, But on the other hand, the supporters of the Constitution were saying, holy God, we can't allow the people out, at large to think that we're in the same camp as Hamilton,
But wasn't that essentially like the last day or two of the entire convention, though? I mean,
no, it was on June 18th.
Yeah.
It was relatively early in the convention because.
Oh, okay. I got it backwards then.
It was scheduled to start. It was scheduled to start early in May, on the 14th of May.
All right.
But it actually didn't begin to meet until I think the 28th of May, because they didn't get a quorum, and so the 18th of June was only a couple of weeks into the convention, and. When Hamilton took off, and he basically said that our situation is so desperate that we need to think monarchy, that this Constitution that we're this Virginia plan that we're looking at, it's not enough. We need more. So basically they, Madison and the others felt like they had to find a way to keep Hamilton quiet, because he was,
oh gosh, I'm glad I asked it. I don't ever like exposing my ignorance, but that was that's important.
Hamilton basically said we need to come up with the strongest government we can possibly get away with.
Well, sure,
But because of the fact that we are, republicanism is so inbred in our culture, it's got to be something that the people support. So his conclusion then is we need to come up with the strongest system that we can get the people to buy into.
And this is the picture that emerges to me, is like when he talks about like the Republicanism is inbred into the essential American culture. We're really talking about a fairly brief moment in the history of the colonies, right? I mean, like that was, I mean, you have Montesquieu, and you have like at some point,
Yeah.
Again, we talked briefly a while back about Gordon Wood and like the Whig movement,
Right.
in American politics, and you know there was just this magical moment, like in the pre-revolutionary time, where republicanism is the talk of the land. Like everybody is discussing it. You know, if you're getting your hair cut, you're talking to your barber about republicanism. If you go to church, you know, the preacher is preaching about republicanism, and everyone, it seems to be like suffused with the whole notion of that this is the grand moment that the entire history of humanity has been building up towards,
Right.
and we have this brand new open land. You know, never mind the people who live here before we arrived, but you know, setting that aside, we have this blank slate to write on.
Yeah.
And now is the moment. And then like the revolution occurs, and we have the articles, and a few years go by, and things just fail to happen according to plan, because
Right.
people get content or complacent or whatever it is they do. We're not really sure. And the people with the money are really wondering, is like, when am I going to get my money back? And
Well,
the investor class is getting lost out, and then we have to fix this, because you know this is a serious problem. You know,
but if you I think I've always concluded that what Madison means when he said republicanism is the genius of the American people. You can go all the way back. Gordon Wood does this. You can go all the way back to the original colonies, to the settling of New England, and the idea of Calvinism, and the idea that from the very beginning, the political traditions that came to the New World were the traditions of the idea that the members of the congregation chose the pastor, chose their preacher, and that the congregations were independent communities, and the idea that the elders of the community, the leaders of the community, of the church, were the ones who basically made the rules, because they were theoretically the ones who knew God's plan, who were best able to divine God's plan from Scripture. And so, in other words, the idea of the community was that the leaders of it received, you know, as John Winthrop said, received their authority to rule from God. But the legitimacy of calling the leaders to office was where the people came in. And that tradition of the people being involved in the government that they create goes all the way back to the founding of the early colonies.
Right. And that's a thread that goes through. That's an argument that goes all the way back through democracies too. I was it Burke and somebody else. There's a famous argument. Does an elected representative is he at the beck and call of his representatives, or does he follow his own lights? I don't remember. That's a famous thing. But like
Edmund Burke. That's Edmund Burke.
Right, Edmund Burke. Right, Edmund Burke versus somebody else. And then, but to me, like whenever I hear Winthrop's speech, it's like, okay, you elected me, and now God tells me what to do, and so at this point, you can sit down and be quiet.
You can be quiet, because I ultimately, I hold my office because you have called me to it. But my authority to function in office comes from God, not you.
Right. Well, yeah. I've always interpreted that as like kind of an early way of saying, like, look, I have to do what I think is right. Now, you people thought that I was a guy whose judgment you could trust, so now you got me, and that's what it is.
Hey, I'll tell you, I got to say, just parenthetically here, but my God, these conversations, I don't know. I hope the hell that people listening enjoy it as much as I'm enjoying it, because I hope
they do too. Believe me,
I just love it.
I feel like there must be a home thing. Oh my God, that guy.
Oh my God, yeah. No, I don't know. No, I love it, because I mean, all this stuff comes out. I mean, it's because of you that the kinds of things that I've thought about, or even the things that I haven't thought about, you encourage me to think about. You made a big thing out of my comment, and it was an off the shoulder comment, off the wall comment about Hamilton's positions being so extreme that other Federalist supporters of the Constitution would become embarrassed by them. I mean, that seemed to me to be a fairly logical conclusion that I drew out of the thing. And you pointed out and said, "Oh, I never heard that before," And the point is, when you look at the context within which it happens, you can begin to see that there are a number of different possibilities, different ways of looking at that. That's what it's about, and that's why this kind of conversation and dialogue needs to happen. The more it happens, the more appreciation we get for the depth of some of these ideas and thoughts.
Okay, I can dig that, and just to take that one little example, I can push that a little further. It reminds me of the comment you made some time back about how enraged, or maybe not enraged, offended one early post-revolutionary was by watching one of his fellow citizens walk down the street with buckles on his shoes, and he doesn't deserve buckles. Who does he think he is?
That was 1775 in Philadelphia.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a constituency there that I think at some point Hamilton might also represent too, and not just Hamilton, but I think also to one or to a lesser or greater extent Madison. And it's not necessarily an elitist thing, although it is.
Mm-hmm.
But these people were paying attention to the revolutionary and post-revolutionary phase, and they noticed that I just get this idea that there was a great sense of anticipation, like we're going to launch this fantastic new venture, and all our citizens are on board, and they're going to be the most civically minded people of all time on the face of the planet. Such a venture has never been undertaken in terms of political self-governance, mm-hmm. and we're going to do it. And then things just fell apart, for lack of a better term, one damn thing after another, right? And then people just they went back to their own personal pursuits, and things broke apart, and certain people like Madison and Hamilton, and I don't know, Jefferson was in France at the time, but he must have been pretty well informed, and you've said on numerous occasions that by the end of the Revolutionary period, like in the early 1800s, 1820s, 30s, like all the original founders had been pretty thoroughly disillusioned.
Right.
Whatever it was they thought was going to happen, they were really, really deeply disappointed with the results. People just did not live up to their expectations.
No. And the election, and Gordon Wood makes the point that the election of Andrew Jackson in 1828 is what brings it out. What mistaken or misplaced faith we had in the ability of the American people to choose wisely. To think that we started off with Washington and already we've deteriorated to Andrew Jackson.
Right.
Suggests that we were overconfident, and that our faith in the people's ability to choose widely was misplaced.
Yeah.
But the irony of the situation is, Horst, and I think this is interesting, it's during this period that reforms are made in the political process that result in the political system that we've got now. In other words, it seems to me, and this calls for a lot of research, I think, and I haven't had the time to do it, but it seems to me that it's at this point that some of the real architects of the American political system begin to realize that we've got what we've got. We've got to figure out a way to deal with it. We may say these people aren't capable of anything. If they're willing to choose Andrew Jackson, then our faith in the American people and in the potential of republicanism was woefully misplaced. But that doesn't mean we go back to an aristocratic society. We can't do that. So the fact of the matter is we've got to find a way to deal with what we've got. And this is the period when the textbooks constantly talk about the celebration of the common man and the idea that political forms are being made to incorporate the mass numbers of citizens into the political process. I think Madison is the one that really clarifies what that's about. He says in that very famous thing in his journal a year before he dies, he said, we've got to get rid of property qualifications totally and give the vote to everybody.
Right.
Because that's the only way we're going to be able to control this situation.
And as I understand it, and this comes from my limited research into the whole electoral college scheme, a few months ago. As I understand it, Madison was also opposed to anything like that. He wanted a direct vote.
Right. And he makes the point in one of the Federalist Papers, and I don't think I've ever read anything which suggests that he contradicts this. And he makes the point that you can't buy off everybody. That if we can find a way to guarantee a massive turnout, then the system will somehow work out its imperfections, and the results will be something we can live with. I mean, it's almost driven by this idea that the voice of the people is the voice of God. That somehow, as uninformed and as chaotic as it is potentially, the sum total of everybody being heard will be the right thing to do. Yeah. And it's almost like, truth will prevail, that kind of thing. And I think there's a faith in that. And so the transition.
Well, they're right there in the age of reason and enlightenment, and the whole sense of that the universe is a mechanism that behaves in certain predictable and very rational and logical, predictable methods.
Oh man, I think you nailed it. I really think. I mean, it's the idea that the same reasons that the planets in the universe don't crash into each other,
right,
means that there's some sort of order out there that we really don't understand, but it operates, and we can set up our political system the same way.
If you empower the people in a democratic institution, you're going to institute a self-correcting mechanism that will sooner or later, reorientate itself to the right. Yeah, right, exactly.
You're reorganizing society into a model of the universe. Into a miniature recreation of the universe, and the sum total is the planets don't crash into each other out there, and somehow all of the voices, being allowed to pitch in, are somehow going to tell us or direct us in the way we ought to go. And I think there's a faith in that.
Right. And of course, back then they also didn't know that, yes, that's partially true, but they didn't realize how many planets had previously collided into each other. And
no, I guess not.
On the way to what we have now. So,
yeah. The Big Bang was something they didn't quite.
Not even that. I'm just talking, just straight,
Oh yeah.
Galactic objects crashing into each other.
Asteroids and all these things. Yeah. But my God, that point you just made. I mean, that's fantastic, because one of the things that this is in a research agenda that I'll never get to, but I've always been captivated in the years that I was teaching American history by the political reforms of the Jackson period, driven by this idea of the celebration of the common man, eliminating all the limitations, all the restrictions, and making it easier for everybody. The only thing they didn't anticipate, they weren't ready for, was women. That took another century. But in terms of, the ideas of property and the ideas of wealth, that ultimately, and this is the period when the major reforms for the idea of the common school, the public school system as we know it, come into being with Horace Mann and those people. And their argument is you make everybody go to school together, rich and poor. And the thinking is the values of the wealthy, of the property, will rub off on the poor. And the poor will begin to respect the rights and achievements of the successful people, and they will buy into the value system that makes it possible for them too to experience that kind of success, and they really have a faith in this. And it's the same thing during the same period. And I think it's reflected in the political reforms of the period as well as the educational. These are all the reforms in what literature, as you know, refers to as the Romantic period. I mean, and when you think of the whole idea of what the Romantic period really is about, what Romantic literature is about, it's about this pie in the sky idealism that, the beauty in nature and all of this stuff.
Oh, well, not just that, but like they felt like humanity had finally reached a point where we could, really take off and we could start getting rid of these false distinctions. I mean,
oh yeah.
One of the things. Oh, I don't know. It's kind of it's a digression, but one thing I remind Bob of a couple of times is there was the major Romantic figures were the English poets, Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats, those guys. They made a friend out of a dude named James Hogg, who was born into very low conditions. He was kind of like well, anyway, it doesn't really matter. But he wrote a book, Confessions of a Justified Sinner, or something like that. And it was all told. It was told from the point of view of a person who was born into like a kind of a Calvinistic sect that believed that you were either born saved or not, and so he believed he was born saved, and so it goes through like two or 300 pages, and he eventually like murders somebody, and the whole time it's done like in a first person narrative, like, and he's just justifying himself the whole way through. But and he was celebrated by these these Romantic poets who were themselves highly privileged. They were well born. They were highly educated, and they adopted this guy, and they tried to introduce him into their circle of society, and he was really pretty soundly rejected. I mean, like humiliated in a couple of instances, and it didn't really work out. So.
Oh God, it's wonderful. Oh yeah. But this is, I mean, in this period in America, this so-called reform period, the Romantic period. One of the things that I remember from sociology is that this is the period when corrections go. The idea of a corrections system, the very word penitentiary. That what we do is that we arrest people, we put them in jail, and they repent, they become penitent.
Penitence, yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's all comes out of this period. It's fascinating.
I'd like to make a request of you for future episodes at the Virtual Center. You mentioned, I think, a French. Again, this is about a year ago, but that there was only one major philosopher or thinker working on like the whole penitentiary system operating like in the 1700s, and I think it was a French guy. I know. I looked him up one time, but I lost the link.
I can't. Oh,
no, maybe not now. Not now, but
oh yeah,
it's somebody. It's somebody that you're aware of. I'm not setting it up.
Okay, I'll probably recognize the name.
But I would like to know. I would like to explore in more depth our notions of justice and our penal systems. Mm-hmm. And what we consider, the proper pursuits for these things, because that's one of the. There's like 3 or 4 areas that I think that we've kind of we're struggling as a nation with certain concepts, and that's one of them. It's like what the purpose of our prison system is in the first place, and
what it ought to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was one particular thinker. It was you mentioned this back when we were talking about the Scottish Enlightenment.
Yeah.
And there was a guy that they referred to, but he wasn't Scottish. He was from somewhere. I believe he was French. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, he was. And I know who you mean. I can't think of it.
Oh, terrific. Okay, so you know who I mean. So
I know who you mean. Yeah.
I would really like to dig into it at some point.
Yeah. Because it's fascinating, because now we've got this mandatory sentencing idea, which is all driven by politics.
Well, not only that, but now we're into private, prisons.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
we're into profit-driven prisons, which is
and the Pope. I mean, the idea of the Pope. The reason that the Pope is opposed to the to the death penalty is because you're denying the human soul the opportunity to repent. That
Right.
if you take his life, then he never has a chance to repent of his sins. And so his argument is that society has a responsibility to do everything it can do to provide man the opportunity to repent of his sins. And the death penalty denies him of that. I mean, and I mean, whatever you think of that argument, if you know, when you can appreciate it a little bit, it makes some sense. You know?
Oh, it does. Yeah, as far as it goes. If that's
Yeah.
if that's what your true aim is, then it's contradictory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's plenty of contradictions.
Oh, it's absolutely. I mean, just think of where we've gone in the last half hour. My God, this is good.
Oh,
This is like a
well.
graduate. This is like a seminar in graduate school. I love it. I love it.
I don't know about that, but okay. I'll tell you what. I'm going to have to let you go here in a minute.
That's okay.
But, if I can drop one or two more things, and this
Sure.
is just a very quick thing.
You do it.
We were talking about who's qualified to think about even amending the Constitution, and what struck me was the irony that the Republicans tend to be the party of, for instance, term limits, and at the same time they're also generally the party of, like, let's run government as though it was a business.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take these two concepts, you can't put them together, because if I have a business and I want a new CEO, am I going to take an outsider, someone who is new to the industry, that has no experience in this business whatsoever, and put him at the top of the ship, for instance?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, no, I'm not going to do that. Number two, if I've got a great CEO, am I going to kick him out at the end of 6 years because he's been here for 6 years or 8 years or whatever it is? I'm not going to do that either.
Right.
And what if we take that same approach to government, in the sense that who gets to decide who's qualified?
Mm-hmm.
And again, this takes us back to what I think is a fundamental question that at the time of Madison they were starting to realize and starting to struggle with. They had this idea that everybody is qualified to judge certain matters. And they're starting to slowly realize, no, everybody is not
No, that's right.
capable of deciding who's the right person to do
Right.
these things.
Right.
And so now we have a big problem: who can vote? And
Yep.
as we call ourselves a democracy and a republican and all that, but how committed to that notion are we? What if a mechanic, someone who fixed your car, was a matter of a vote?
Mm-hmm.
Or what if the qualification to be a doctor or a surgeon was just like who likes you best, or a lawyer? Or you pick any major profession, there has to be some kind of professional
Criteria.
certified. Yeah, there's got to be some
criteria.
standards.
Yeah.
There's got to be standards for that. But at the same time, on the other hand, the more we expand the franchise, the best we can do is expand education.
Right.
But we're constantly fighting over what constitutes an actual education, and we are so
Right.
unscientific about the whole process that there's no way it's going to work out. And so, as a result, the whole Citizens United thing. Look, if you and I are informed citizens and we know what the issues are, and we understand who stands for what policy and what they're going to do when they get in office, and we have an understanding of what their history is, no amount of money or advertisements is going to affect our decision
Mm-hmm.
about who we're going to vote for. We know whose camp we're in, and we're going to support that person. But if you don't know what you're doing, and all you do is work your tail off 10, 11, 12 hours a day and come home and try to pretend you're not at work for a couple of hours and watch TV and just passively absorb information that's blaring at you through advertisements,
Mm-hmm.
sooner or later you're going to get ideas. You don't even know where your ideas come from. And especially if they're couched in like very catchy, language that has been focus grouped intensely to make sure
Yeah.
that you remember it,
Yep.
and it makes it feel believable. That's to me, that's the impasse we're at.
Right.
We have to. It's not just a question of education. It's not just a question of
right.
of
Right.
democracy, even, or we have to expand something more
Yeah.
than we're even talking about. There's something that's not even on the table that we're not discussing, and we need to get to that. I don't know what exactly it is, but
I know that we can't do it today because we got less than a minute.
no, we can't. We can't. And so I just dropped a lot on your lap there, but I will I'll let you get back to it.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. I love it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Talk to you next time, Bob.
Okay. Thank you, Horst. We're at 59 minutes after the hour, and it's time for us to leave. I want to thank you. I want to thank Horst and thank all of you who've been listening to the Virtual Center today, and invite you back to tomorrow's program. Remember, we'll be starting 1/2 hour later tomorrow. It'll be 1:30 in the East. Have a good evening. Be good. Be kind to each other. And hope that you'll be back with us again tomorrow. Thank you.